The coastal breeze carried the scent of jasmine and salt water through the open windows of the luxury resort as Sophia Chen stepped out of the car. She smoothed down her sundress and took a deep breath, reminding herself why she was here. Her best friend Rachel was getting married, and nothing would dampen this celebration. Not even the grueling work week she had just survived, or the fact that she would be spending the next 3 days surrounded by people who seemed to have their lives perfectly together. While hers felt like controlled chaos, the resort was breathtaking. White buildings with terracotta roofs cascaded down toward the ocean, connected by stone pathways lined with flowering vines. Palm trees swayed gently, and the sound of waves created a constant, soothing rhythm. Sophia grabbed her suitcase and headed toward the main entrance, where a fountain bubbled cheerfully in the courtyard. She had barely made it through the doors when she heard a voice that stopped her in her tracks. "Well, if it isn't Sophia Chen, still showing up exactly on time, I see." Sophia turned slowly, her stomach sinking as she recognized the tall figure leaning against the reception desk. James Hartford looked infuriatingly good in linen pants and a white shirt. His dark hair slightly tousled, his gray eyes holding that same glint of mischief that had driven her crazy throughout college. He was the last person she expected to see here, and definitely the last person she wanted to deal with. "James," she said flatly, forcing herself to maintain composure, "I should have known Rachel would invite you. She always did have questionable taste." He pushed off from the desk and walked toward her with that confident stride she remembered all too well. "Nice to see you too. Still as sharp as ever, though I have to say the years have been kind to you." Sophia refused to acknowledge the compliment or the way her heart rate had inexplicably increased. James Hartford had been her nemesis during their university years. Every debate, every group project, every academic competition had turned into a battle between them. He had a way of getting under her skin like no one else, always knowing exactly what to say to provoke her. "What are you doing here?" she asked, already dreading the answer. "Rachel and I stayed close after graduation. I'm actually the best man," he smiled, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "Which makes you and me partners for most of the wedding events." "Didn't Rachel mention that?" Before Sophia could respond, Rachel herself appeared, radiant and beaming, pulling both of them into a hug. "You are both here. This is perfect. I know you two have history, but please, for me, can you just get along for 3 days? I need my maid of honor and my best man to work together." Sophia opened her mouth to protest, but Rachel's pleading expression stopped her. She sighed and forced a smile. "Of course. Anything for you?" James nodded in agreement, though the smirk on his face suggested he was already planning ways to torment her. Rachel clapped her hands together and pulled out a list. "Wonderful. Because I need you both to help with the welcome bags this afternoon. Then the rehearsal dinner setup. And tomorrow, there is the dance rehearsal before the ceremony." The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Sophia and James worked side by side, assembling gift bags filled with local treats, maps of the resort, and personalized notes from the bride and groom. The silence between them was thick with unspoken tension, broken only by occasional barbs. "You are putting too many chocolates in each bag," James commented. "Watching her work? And you are not putting enough," Sophia shot back. "Some of us actually care about the guests having a good experience. Some of us actually follow instructions," he countered. Holding up the list Rachel had provided, they continued in this manner for hours, each small disagreement building on the last, until Sophia felt ready to explode. But she kept her composure, reminding herself that this was about Rachel, not about her decade-old rivalry with James Hartford. That evening, after the rehearsal dinner, Rachel gathered the wedding party for the dance practice. The resort had converted one of the ballrooms into a rehearsal space, complete with a polished wooden floor and soft lighting. A dance instructor named Margaret stood at the front, clapping her hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, everyone. The maid of honor and best man will open the dance floor after the bride and groom. Let me show you the basic steps." Sophia felt her throat tighten as James appeared at her side, extending his hand with an exaggerated bow. "May I have this dance, Miss Chen?" She placed her hand in his, ignoring the unexpected warmth of his touch. "Let us just get this over with." Margaret guided them through the basic waltz steps, correcting their posture and positioning. Sophia tried to focus on the instructions. but she was acutely aware of every point where her body touched James. His hand on her waist was firm but gentle, and he was surprisingly graceful for someone who had spent most of college hunched over engineering textbooks. "You are tense," he murmured as they moved across the floor. "I wonder whose fault that is," she replied, keeping her eyes fixed over his shoulder. "We are going to have to actually look like we enjoy each other's company when we do this tomorrow. All the guests will be watching." Sophia finally met his gaze, surprised by the lack of mockery in his expression. For a moment, she saw something different in his eyes, something she could not quite identify. The music swelled, and Margaret called for them to attempt a turn. James guided her into the spin, but Sophia miscalculated the movement. Her heel caught on the hem of her dress, and she stumbled. James immediately caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist to steady her. The momentum carried them both backward. They landed on a cushioned bench that had been pushed against the wall. For a heartbeat, they were frozen. Sophia was half sprawled across James, her hands pressed against his chest, his arms still around her. Their faces were inches apart, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, close enough to feel his breath on her skin. Then, whether by accident or impulse, their lips met. The kiss was brief, shocking, like touching a live wire. Sophia pulled back immediately, her cheeks burning as she scrambled to her feet. James sat up more slowly, his expression unreadable. "That was," she began, unable to find the words. "An accident," he finished, standing and brushing off his pants. "Just an accident." Margaret hurried over, concerned, but they both assured her they were fine. The rest of the rehearsal passed in a daze, with Sophia barely registering the steps or the music. Her mind was stuck on that moment, on the unexpected softness of the kiss, and the even more unexpected jolt of electricity that had accompanied it. When the practice finally ended, Sophia fled to her room, her heart pounding. She stood on her balcony, staring out at the dark ocean, trying to make sense of what had happened. It meant nothing. It was an accident, just like James said. But even as she told herself this, she could not shake the memory of how it felt, or the growing certainty that the next 2 days were going to be far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The morning sun filtered through sheer curtains as Sophia woke to the sound of seagulls calling over the ocean. For a blissful moment, she forgot where she was and why her stomach felt twisted in knots. Then the memory of last night came rushing back. The dance, the fall, the kiss. She pressed her palms against her eyes and groaned. It was just an accident, she reminded herself for the 100th time. Nothing more than an embarrassing mishap that they would both pretend never happened. After a long shower and careful attention to her appearance, Sophia made her way down to breakfast. The resort's terrace restaurant overlooked the water. With tables set beneath white umbrellas that fluttered in the gentle breeze, she spotted Rachel immediately, surrounded by bridesmaids and family members, all chattering excitedly about the ceremony that would take place that afternoon. Sophia grabbed a plate of fruit and pastries and was heading toward the table when she nearly collided with James. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee, and he managed to stop just in time to avoid spilling them both. "Careful," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Seems like we keep running into each other." "Literally," Sophia replied, trying to keep her tone light despite the sudden acceleration of her pulse. She noticed he looked tired, with faint shadows under his eyes, as if he had not slept well either. "About last night," James began, but Sophia cut him off. "It was nothing. An accident. Let us just forget about it." She moved past him before he could respond. Joining the group at Rachel's table, the morning passed in a whirlwind of final preparations. Sophia helped Rachel with her hair and makeup, adjusted the endless layers of her wedding dress, and managed the increasingly anxious bridesmaids. Through it all, she kept herself busy enough that she did not have time to think about James or the strange flutter in her chest whenever she caught a glimpse of him across the resort. The ceremony took place in a garden overlooking the sea, with rows of white chairs arranged in a semicircle around an arch draped in cream-colored roses and flowing silk. Sophia stood at the altar as Rachel and Thomas exchanged vows. She found herself genuinely moved by the love evident in every word they spoke. This was what marriage should be, she thought. 2 people who chose each other every day, who built something real together. Her eyes drifted to where James stood on the opposite side. and she was startled to find him already looking at her. He did not look away when their gazes met, and something in his expression made her breath catch. There was an intensity there, questions she was not ready to answer. The ceremony concluded with cheers and applause. And soon the entire party moved to the grand ballroom for the reception. The space had been transformed into something magical. With thousands of tiny lights strung across the ceiling like stars and centerpieces of white orchids on every table, a live band played softly as guests found their seats. Sophia was seated at the head table between James and one of Rachel's cousins. She tried to focus on her conversation with the cousin, a pleasant woman named Patricia, who worked as a veterinarian. But she was constantly aware of James beside her. Every time he shifted in his seat or reached for his water glass, she noticed dinner was served. An elegant meal of seared fish and roasted vegetables that Sophia barely tasted. The speeches began, and when it was James's turn, he stood and raised his glass. Sophia expected something humorous, maybe even slightly irreverent, but instead he spoke with genuine emotion about friendship and love, about how rare it was to find someone who truly understood you as he spoke. His eyes kept returning to Sophia, and she felt heat rising to her cheeks. When he finished and sat back down, she leaned toward him without thinking. "That was beautiful," she said quietly. "I meant every word," he replied. And there was something in his voice that made her wonder if he was talking about more than just the bride and groom than the band. It struck up a waltz, and the DJ announced that the newlyweds would take their first dance, followed by the maid of honor and best man. Sophia's heart began to race as Rachel and Thomas glided onto the floor, moving together with practiced grace. Too soon, it was their turn. James stood and offered his hand, and Sophia took it, allowing him to lead her to the center of the ballroom. All eyes turned toward them, but Sophia found that once James's hand settled on her waist and they began to move, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. This time, there were no missteps. James guided her through the turns with confidence, and Sophia let herself relax into the rhythm. She had to admit he was an excellent dancer, leading her effortlessly across the floor. "You look beautiful tonight," James said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I should have said that earlier." "Thank you," Sophia replied, unsure how to respond to this version of James. The one without the sharp edges and constant needling. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He smiled, a real smile without any trace of mockery. "I had been thinking about what you said this morning. About forgetting last night. Please, we do not need to discuss this here." "I know, but I want you to know that I cannot forget it. And I do not want to." Sophia's step faltered, and James steadied her immediately, pulling her closer than strictly necessary. She looked up at him, searching his face for signs that this was another game, another way to get under her skin. But all she saw was sincerity. The song ended, and applause erupted around them. James released her slowly, his hand lingering at her waist for a moment longer than needed. Sophia stepped back, her mind reeling, and mumbled something about needing air before hurrying toward the terrace doors outside. The night was warm and clear, with the ocean stretching endlessly under a canopy of stars. Sophia gripped the stone railing and tried to steady her breathing. What was happening? This was James Hartford, the man who had spent 4 years making her college experience a constant competition. They were rivals, adversaries. Definitely not people who danced together and felt sparks flying. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without turning that it was him. "I am sorry," James said, coming to stand beside her. "I did not mean to make you uncomfortable in there." "You did not," Sophia said, then corrected herself. "Well, you did, but not in a bad way. I am just confused. That makes 2 of us." He turned to face her, leaning against the railing. "Can I be honest with you? I wish you would be." James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I have thought about you a lot over the years, about how things were between us in college. And I have wondered more times than I can count what might have happened if I had not been such an arrogant fool back then." Sophia stared at him. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I pushed you away because I did not know how else to deal with what I felt. You were brilliant and driven and absolutely terrifying in the best possible way. And instead of telling you that I admired you, turned everything into a competition because that was the only way I knew how to be close to you. The confession hung in the air between them. Sophia felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crack. You made my life miserable. No. And I regret that more than you realize. He took a step closer. But seeing you again this weekend has made me realize that whatever I felt back then never really went away. If anything, it has gotten stronger. Sophia's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. James, this is crazy. We barely know each other anymore, and let me get to know you now. The real you, not the rival I created in my head. He reached out tentatively and took her hand. Give me a chance to show you that I am not the same person I was back then. She should say no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that made her hesitate. Vulnerability. Hope. The same longing she was trying so hard to deny in herself. One chance, she heard herself say. But if you revert to your old ways, I am done. James's face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire expression. You will not regret this. He leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away. When Sophia did not move, he closed the distance between them and kissed her. This time, it was nothing like the accidental brush of lips from the night before. This kiss was deliberate, deep, filled with years of unspoken tension, finally finding release. Sophia melted into it. Her hands finding their way to his shoulders as his arms wrapped around her waist. The kiss went on until they were both breathless. Until the world had narrowed to just the two of them and the electric current running between them. When they finally broke apart, Sophia rested her forehead against his chest, trying to catch her breath and process what had just happened. Wow, James murmured into her hair. That was worth waiting a decade for. Sophia laughed despite herself, a sound of pure joy that surprised them both. Maybe this was crazy. Maybe it would all fall apart tomorrow. But right now, in this moment, with the stars overhead and James's arms around her, Sophia decided to stop overthinking and just feel. They stood together on the terrace for a long time, talking quietly about everything and nothing, sharing stories from the years they had been apart, laughing at memories that no longer carried any sting. It felt easy, natural, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. Eventually, they returned to the reception, though neither could resist stolen glances and secret smiles across the room. When the night finally wound down and guests began to drift away, James walked Sophia to her room. At her door, he kissed her again, softer this time, sweet and promising. Breakfast tomorrow? He asked. I would like that, Sophia replied, and meant it. She went to bed that night with her mind spinning, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. Maybe second chances were real. Maybe people could change. Maybe this wedding weekend would turn out to be the beginning of something extraordinary. Sophia woke the next morning with sunlight streaming across her face and a smile already forming on her lips. For the first time in years, she felt genuinely excited about what the day might bring. She reached for her phone and found a text from James waiting for her. Good morning. Meet me at the beach cafe in an hour. I promise the coffee is worth the walk. She typed back a quick yes and got ready with more care than usual, choosing a flowing white sundress and leaving her dark hair loose around her shoulders. As she walked down the stone pathway toward the beach, she felt butterflies dancing in her stomach. This was new territory, and despite her natural tendency to plan everything, she was trying to just let things unfold. The beach cafe was a charming structure built on stilts over the sand. With a thatched roof and open sides that let in the ocean breeze, James was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and a plate of pastries. He stood when he saw her approaching, and the genuine warmth in his smile made her heart skip. You look amazing, he said, pulling out her chair. Thank you, Sophia replied. Settling into her seat and accepting the coffee, he slid toward her. This is perfect. They talked easily over breakfast, the conversation flowing from books they had read recently to places they wanted to travel. Sophia found herself laughing more than she had in months, surprised by how much she enjoyed James's company when he was not trying to one-up her at every turn. I have a confession, James said, as they finished their second cup of coffee. I kinda stalked your career online after graduation. Every time your firm won a major case, I would read about it. I was proud of you, even though I had no right to be. Sophia felt her cheeks warm. I may have done the same thing. Your architectural designs are incredible, by the way. That museum in Portland is stunning. You saw that? His eyes lit up with pleasure. I may have taken a weekend trip specifically to see it, she admitted. They were leaning across the table toward each other, lost in their own world, when James's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned slightly. My cousin Eric is being persistent. He wants to meet up before he heads back to the city this afternoon. Do you mind if I step away for just a few minutes? I will be right back. Of course, go ahead, Sophia said. Waving him off, James stood and walked toward the entrance of the cafe, where a tall man in a polo shirt was waiting. Sophia watched them embrace and start talking, then deliberately turned her attention to her phone to give James privacy. She was scrolling through her emails. She heard voices carrying across the open space. The cafe was designed in a way that sound traveled oddly, and she could hear James and his cousin clearly, even though they were 20 feet away around a corner. She was about to put in her earbuds when she heard her own name. So that is Sophia Chen. Eric's voice was teasing. The infamous rival from college? She is gorgeous, man. What is going on there? Sophia froze, her finger hovering over her phone screen. There was a pause, and then she heard James laugh. The sound made her stomach clench. Come on, Eric, it is not like that. We are just having some fun at a wedding. Nothing serious. Could have fooled me. You two looked pretty cozy last night. Well, you know how weddings are. Everyone gets caught up in the romance. It does not mean anything beyond this weekend. Sophia felt like she had been punched in the chest. The cafe suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too suffocating. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed her purse and stood up. She needed to leave before James came back and saw the tears starting to form in her eyes. She left money on the table for her breakfast and walked quickly down the beach, not caring about the direction, just needing distance. How could she have been so stupid? Nothing had changed. James was still playing games, still treating everything like a competition he needed to win. She had let her guard down, had actually started to believe that maybe this could be real. And he was dismissing it all as wedding romance to his cousin. By the time she made it back to her room, angry tears were streaming down her face. She paced the floor, trying to calm down, trying to think rationally. But every time she closed her eyes, she heard his voice saying those words. Nothing serious. Just having some fun. Does not mean anything. A knock at her door made her freeze. Sophia. Are you in there? James's voice was concerned. You left the cafe. Are you okay? She wiped her eyes and opened the door, keeping her expression as neutral as possible. I am fine. I just needed to get back and pack. I am catching an earlier flight home. James's face fell. What? Why? I thought we were spending the day together. Plans change, she said coldly, starting to close the door. He put his hand on the doorframe, stopping her. Sophia, what happened? 10 minutes ago, everything was perfect, and now you are running away. I am not running away. I am making a smart decision for once. She crossed her arms. Did you have a nice chat with your cousin Eric? Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by panic. You heard that? Sophia, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. You made yourself very clear. This is just wedding fun, nothing serious. Does not mean anything beyond the weekend. I get it. That is not what I meant, James said urgently. Eric was being pushy, and I just said what I thought he wanted to hear. You know how guys are? We do not talk about real feelings. We deflect and make jokes and act like nothing matters. So your real feelings are so fragile that you cannot even admit them to your own family? Sophia felt fresh tears threatening. Or maybe those really are your real feelings, and everything you said last night was just another one of your games. It was not a game, James insisted, his voice rising with frustration. Everything I said last night was true. I have thought about you for 10 years, Sophia. 10 years of wondering what if, of regretting how I treated you, of hoping I might get another chance. And this weekend, when I saw you again and realized that I still feel the same way, it terrified me. So yes, when Eric started asking questions, I panicked and said something stupid because admitting the truth out loud felt too real, too vulnerable. Sophia wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to believe that he was telling the truth. But the wound was too fresh, the echo of his dismissive words too loud in her mind. "I need time to think," she said quietly. "Please, just give me some space." James looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. "Okay," he said finally. "But Sophia, please, do not give up on this. On us. I know I messed up, but I am asking you to give me one more chance to make it right." She closed the door without answering and leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the floor. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, checking if she would be at the farewell brunch the resort was hosting. Sophia considered skipping it, but she had not come all this way to let James Hartford ruin her best friend's wedding weekend. Again, she took a long shower, fixed her makeup, and put on a cheerful yellow dress that did not match her mood at all. Then she headed to the brunch with her head held high. The event was held on a large terrace overlooking the ocean, with tables laden with fresh fruit, pastries, and breakfast dishes. Most of the wedding guests were there, nursing mild hangovers and sharing stories from the reception. Sophia found Rachel and congratulated her again, carefully steering the conversation away from anything involving James. But she could feel his eyes on her from across the terrace. Every time she glanced in his direction, he was watching her with an expression that was part longing, part regret, part determination. She did her best to ignore him, focusing on conversations with other guests. But her awareness of him never faded. As the brunch was winding down, James approached her table. Several of Rachel's relatives were sitting there, which meant Sophia could not simply walk away without causing a scene. "Excuse me, everyone," James said politely. "I hate to interrupt, but Sophia, could I please speak with you for just a moment? It is important." The other guests looked between them with curiosity. Sophia knew she had no choice but to agree without making things awkward for Rachel. She stood and followed James to a quiet corner of the terrace, her arms crossed defensively. "What do you want, James?" He took a deep breath. "I want to tell you the truth. The whole truth, without deflection or jokes or any of the defense mechanisms I usually hide behind. I am listening. When I was in college, I had this image of who I needed to be, confident, unshakable, always winning. And then you showed up, and you challenged everything. You were smarter than me in some ways, more dedicated, more passionate about your work. And instead of admiring that openly, I turned it into a rivalry, because that felt safer than admitting you intimidated me." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as nervousness. "After graduation, I dated other people, even had a couple of serious relationships. But none of them ever measured up because they were not you. They did not challenge me, did not push me to be better, did not make me feel alive the way you did, even when we were arguing." Sophia felt her resolve beginning to waver, but she stayed silent. "This weekend, when I realized I had a second chance, I promised myself I would not waste it. And I meant everything I said last night, every word. But this morning when Eric started asking questions, I panicked. Because admitting to him that I was falling for you meant admitting it to myself, and that is terrifying. What if you do not feel the same way? What if I mess this up again? What if this is as good as it gets, and reality does not measure up?" He stepped closer, close enough that Sophia could see the vulnerability in his eyes. "I am sorry I hurt you. I am sorry I made you doubt what we have. But Sophia, what we have is real. It is the most real thing I have felt in a decade. And I am done pretending otherwise. Done protecting myself at the expense of something that could be extraordinary." Sophia felt tears welling up again, but this time they were not from anger. "How do I know you mean it? How do I know this is not just another game? Because I am standing here in front of all these people about to make a complete fool of myself if you reject me, and I am doing it anyway." He reached for her hands, and this time she did not pull away. "I am asking you to take a chance on me. On us. Not just for this weekend, but for real. I want to date you properly, take you to dinner, meet your friends, introduce you to my family as the woman I am crazy about. I want all of it, Sophia. If you will have me." The terrace had gone quiet. Sophia realized that their conversation had attracted attention, and half the wedding guests were now watching them with rapt interest. Rachel was standing nearby with her hands clasped over her heart, tears in her eyes. Sophia looked at James, really looked at him, and saw past the polished exterior to the man beneath. The man who was scared and hopeful and willing to be vulnerable in front of a crowd just to prove his sincerity. She thought about the boy from college who had hidden his feelings behind competition and sarcasm. And the man he had become who was brave enough to name what he wanted. "You really hurt me this morning," she said quietly. "I know. And I will spend as long as it takes making it up to you. I do not forgive easily. I do not expect you to. I just expect you to give me the chance to earn it." Sophia felt a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. "You are going to have to work very hard to convince me this is real." Hope blazed in James's eyes. "Does that mean you are saying yes?" "I am saying that I am willing to try. But James, if you ever dismiss what we have again, if you ever make me feel like I am just a game to you, I am done. I mean it. You will never have to worry about that again," he promised. "I am all in, Sophia. Completely, terrifyingly, all in." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her right there in front of everyone. The terrace erupted in applause and cheers, with Rachel squealing loudly enough to be heard over the ocean waves. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, James rested his forehead against hers. "So what happens now?" "Now, you take me on a proper date," Sophia said, "and you spend the rest of today proving that you deserve a second chance." "I can do that," he grinned. "Though I should warn you, I am a much better person than I was in college. You might actually like me." "I always liked you," Sophia admitted. That was the problem. They spent the rest of the day together, walking on the beach, talking about their dreams and fears, making plans for how they would navigate a relationship when they lived in different cities. It would not be easy, they both knew that. But for the first time, Sophia felt certain that they could make it work. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat together on the sand. James had his arm around her shoulders, and Sophia leaned into his warmth, feeling more content than she had in years. "Thank you, James," said softly. "For what?" "For giving me another chance. For seeing past who I was to who I want to be. For being brave enough to trust me again." Sophia turned to look at him, this man who had been her rival, her frustration, and now something infinitely more precious. "Thank you for not giving up. For being honest, even when it was hard. For proving that people really can change." He kissed her again as the sun dipped below the horizon, and Sophia knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, obstacles to overcome. But they would face them together, as partners instead of rivals, building something real and lasting from the ashes of their complicated past. The wedding weekend had brought them back together, but it was their choice to stay together that would write the rest of their story. And as they sat on that beach, wrapped in each other's arms with the stars beginning to appear overhead, Sophia was certain it would be a story worth telling. Thank you for taking that time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like. Share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.